People frequently talk about how collaborative Columbus is. They often call it the Columbus way. You might have heard that. Our panel this evening takes a closer look at the power of partnership and explores what the Columbus way means to our community. So let's welcome Kevin Boyce, Franklin County Commissioner, Tanny Crane, President and CEO of the Crane Group, Kenny McDonald, President and CEO of the Columbus Partnership, and our host, Doug Buchanan, editor of Columbus Business First. All right. There's, of course, more information about our speakers in your forum flyer, and Doug, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I've said this in a very different context, but the less I say tonight, the better. So, Kevin, how about you break the ice with what has happened with your foot?
I was trying to think of something really cool to say, but I really have nothing cool to say. I was actually training for a marathon, and I had a fracture. And so, I know, isn't that so sad? Yeah. So, the sympathy vote. You're right, the sympathy vote. Yeah. So I've just got to wear this for a few months.
So the Columbus Marathon is out.
Yeah. I mean, I could hop the other way, but I don't think that'll work.
Right. All right, so just so we can set the table for what we're talking about, if we're talking about these public-private partnerships that are working, what would be the example or an example that you would pull out and lead with? Tanny, do you want to take that?
Well, we were just talking about it. I just think a great example is Adelphi Bank, and I'll let Kevin talk about it, but the first Black-owned bank, certainly in our community and one of the few in the nation, and it was really Commissioner Boyce, his idea. And I think the collaborative spirit of coming to the Columbus Partnership and really rallying behind the critical need that they've identified, and really not just financially backing it, but board support and rallying community support. I just think it's a great opportunity.
Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. Thank you, Tanny, for that setup. When I think about, so let me give you what I know. The banking is the second highest regulatory environment that exists on the globe. The first is nuclear power plants. So the effort to organize or form a bank is substantial. And when we started off the process to pull together this minority depository institutions, what's the technical term, we started this effort, I quickly realized, okay, I need some help. And so we hired we just searched for one of the best consultants in the nation, and it happened to exist in Los Angeles. And this was right around the time that George Floyd was murdered, and there was a lot of unrest nationally. We were just getting the pandemic going, so there were a lot of question and uneasiness in the country. When I called the consultant, I'll be very quick. When I called the consultant said, wow, the timing of this is incredible. I've had no less than a couple of dozen entities. He said, I've been doing this for 50 years, and I've had no less than a couple of dozen entities who are starting to organize an MDI. Fast forward 2 years later, you know how many made it through the regulatory process? One. And that's right here. But to Tanny's point, though, it's really an illustration of the collaborative spirit of Central Ohio, because there is no way possible that we would be on this home stretch of organizing. I hope there aren't any regulators in the room that are, watching me what I say here, but there's no way we'd be on this home stretch without the collaborative spirit of the Columbus Way. While I can't get into all of the details about who the investors are, advisors are, and folks who've just been engaged and encouraged us all along the way, I can tell you that only in Central Ohio do you have that type of spirit where at every layer, at every turn, there is a willingness to be engaged. And it didn't stop at just the organizing part. We have many partners who said, look, it's not just enough for us to be an investor and support you. What can we do to really address creating access to capital resources? What can we do to address home ownership? What can we do to address entrepreneurial opportunities? And every last one of those entities have been engaged with us in a way that I just cannot put in words. Mm-hmm. And that's why we've made it through the process over the last 2 years, and we're really at what I would say, close to the final stage
Right.
of the regulatory process.
And there was a role in the Columbus Partnership in this.
Absolutely.
Well, the business community is involved in everything that Kevin and Tanny talked about. Tanny's a great example of that. And when you ask a question, Doug, I look down the river and think of the Scioto Mile, and I think of the Columbus Promise. I think of any real big thing that actually has happened in this community in the 12 years that I've lived here. It requires a public-private partnership. We like to think we're good at it, but it does require that to actually work. We don't have a business project in this county that we don't come to Kevin in his seat at the Franklin County Commission. They don't get anything done, and usually if the business community isn't behind it or private investment isn't involved. And increasingly, our academic institutions are sort of a third leg of that stool. And even with all the nonprofit leaders we have here and some of the incredible work that they do, and then financing they bring to the table, all of those elements working together with the expectation that everybody's going to do that, and at least try to make it work, and usually get to the goal line, like Kevin said, that is unique. We're not the only ones who collaborate. But we get more things to the finish line than most people, I hope.
Right. And it sounds like, Kevin, you took this to the partnership, but if companies are coming to you or developers are coming to Franklin County, like, what is your process of deciding, yes, we will leverage public money in this, or this isn't something that is worth taxpayer involvement?
Sure. I mean, certainly when particularly big items, the best example I could think of is the Columbus Crew. Okay. When the owners of the Crew decided to move the team to Austin, Texas, it always takes a quarterback behind the scenes, and one person that says, "Okay, I'll quarterback." But the Central Ohio or the Columbus way is that everybody sort of gets in a huddle on the quarterback and says, "Okay, what's my part? I'm going to run the route. I'm going to carry the ball. I'm going to block. And that's how we work in Central Ohio. We're used to seeing a winning football team, so we all know our parts in that way. But that's an example where, when it was presented to us, I remember getting a call from Alex Fisher, who was then leading the partnership, and said, "Hey, we've got to do something, and we've got to come together." And it's not that simple for us. We don't have a money printing press machine in the basement of the county, and we don't have unlimited funds. These are your funds, your tax dollars that are hard-earned dollars that we are stewards of. And so we have to look at everything from the standpoint of what is the greater impact to the masses. Does it create jobs? Does it create economic commerce? Does it do something? Is it inclusive of every community? And so once we meet those basic factors, then we talk about our role. And the partnership was so instrumental in saying, not only do you have a role, but we'll take the lead, and here's what our part will be. Okay. And that's where it just motivates you to say, well, okay, well, this is our part. Well, we can handle that. We can block on this play. We can throw the ball on this play. We can catch the ball on this play. And just knowing your role and understanding it. And there are times where we take the lead and we go to people like Tanny or to Kenny McDonald or to Steve Steinauer, who's heading the partnership now. And we say, hey, we've got this idea, like we did with our Rise Together blueprint to eradicate poverty and racism in Central Ohio. And at every turn, folks have said, okay, here are our measuring sticks. Here's what we want to accomplish. Okay, now, what role do you have for me? What do you have for me? I know Tanny's on that board and helped us form that program. And that's just how we work in Central Ohio. It's just really part of the way it goes.
Tanny?
No, we can talk about Intel, this massive undertaking that's about to occur. And this is a regional approach. And that's how we really think about it, as a regional opportunity and a catalyst. And we had a recent report from AECOM talking about what happens to cities that have a major opportunity, because we can either plan for it or be blindsided. And I think that's, again, where this collaborative spirit is, when we look at this as an opportunity. But we all together in the huddle have to plan and say, what role are we going to play? And like workforce development is going to be just a critical need. It's just right upon us in 2025, along with critical needs of employers all over Central Ohio. So what role can we all play? And how can we make sure that it's an equitable role? I mean, that's something that has really come to the forefront of the Columbus Partnership. in terms of our growth has been remarkable, but has it been a growth and prosperity for all?
Right.
And we're focusing on that. And so how can we, as a partnership with business leaders and the business community, how can we really support the workforce development in the future and ensure that our students in our school systems and our college students have an opportunity to thrive and stay here in Central Ohio?
Yeah, it's interesting because you plan for it or get blindsided by it, right? So we have an amazing opportunity to deploy a whole bunch of federal money that's coming our way, and I feel like we either get our ducks in a row or this money just kind of like splashes all over the place. So what are we doing to ensure that there's going to be winners and losers, but at least this money is going to be concentrated, I guess? Do you want to take it?
Well, that's a never like to think of it as winners and losers. And I think one of the things about Central Ohio that I like most is that our approach is not a no, but how. How do we get there? And a lot of times you go, and I'm familiar with a lot of other communities, you go in and folks want to just find a way to say, we can't do that. These are the rules why we can't. This is the structure, this is the history, this is the whatever. In Central Ohio, it's not no, but how. How do we get there? How do we meet that need? And it might not be today, but tomorrow. And I can think of 5 different things that beyond Intel, the crew, banking, that we need to collaborate on. Electric vehicle charging is queued up as a national effort by the White House and by car automakers. And so we've got to think collaboratively about how we can meet that need of a very changing environment around transportation and automobile providers. And so I'm absolutely certain Central Ohio will lead the way one way or another, because that's in our DNA, it's our spirit.
Okay.
We've used this approach as a catalyst to get moving again. I moved here right after the housing recession of 08 and 09, and we needed, it was a great community, but like a lot of places, it was trying to get its wheels turning again. And this collaborative spirit got us moving because it required people to lock arms. And now it's a little bit of an evolution of this approach. Now our problems exceed our capacity unless we do it. Now it's great that we have this muscle, that we built muscle to do this, and we built these relationships over time. We're also going to have to evolve and fold in new leaders. I think Tanny and I were with a group of partnership leaders last week, about 50 of us, and I would count maybe a third of them are very new. And when you say, what is the Columbus way, they might be coming into their seat for the first time. They may move up into in the lead role in their company or something like that. And they're looking to those like Tanny and others that say, how does this really work? And it's hard to explain sometimes until you have that tangible project or somebody has that idea and you start to see the huddle form. Right. And again, those huddles are getting bigger. More partners have to be involved. And then the final thing I'll say about it is the huddle looks different too since in my 12 years. That huddle was just some of the same actors, but it also wasn't diverse when you got around that. And who are we going to invite into that huddle, right? It's not up to us all the time, but who's when we look around that huddle, who's there? Mm-hmm. Because if they're one of the primary partners, the minority community, our immigrant community, people from different geographers doing this regionally, is increasingly that we're going to have to do it. And by the way, it makes it so much stronger. And if that evolution, if we're talking 10 years from now, and we're talking about another step change in this as we get to be an even bigger place or more successful place, right, we really have done something.
Sure. Yeah, I do. I want to. Speaking of Intel, I mean the housing and I feel like housing and workforce are twin real pressing needs. It's not Intel didn't cause them, but it's accelerated.
Yeah. To bring up Intel, I will note that.
Tanny actually brought it up.
It's a catalyst.
Saving it.
Yeah, it's a catalyst. So I think we know a little bit more about the workforce side, so we'll hit that in a second. But on housing, we need housing. We need all types of housing. We need affordable housing. Like, what specifically are we saying that that's something that the public, in the public-private partnerships, like what are we saying that can be done to accelerate this building process that we need to get moving on?
Well, I'll start with that one too. First of all, we're in a national housing crisis, not just Central Ohio that's facing this challenge. Today, we are 50,000 units short today. We are projected to grow by over 1 million people over the next 20 to 30 years right here in Columbus. And so we've got some work to do. I think the collaborative spirit, the Columbus way, has to expand regionally. We've got to have that same relationship with Licking County and Delaware County, Union County, and all of those, Fairfield County, all of the counties that surround us, so that regionally we can begin to work together to provide for the range of housing needs and collaborate in a way that if you work at Intel and you live in Newark, and maybe you work in Columbus and you have a relationship in Newark, that there's a seamless connection, and that you understand, when we think Intel, it's not in Franklin County, unfortunately, but it's not in Franklin County. But when we think of it as right here in Central Ohio. We think of it right here in Franklin County. You can best believe when I'm walking around the country, I talk about it being right here. But they don't know it's the next county over. But, the point is that in the big scheme of things, that's what's important. And that's the relationship that we have regionally to work together to address these needs. If we put that weight, if we bear that weight on the city of Columbus, if we bear that weight even on Newark, then we will have failed before we ever got started. So it requires us to think regionally and really go beyond our typical boundaries that we work through.
And in effect, you're saying we need to convince the suburbs and the exurbs and the counties to build more, to allow more housing, more variety of housing. Like
the range.
Yeah, the range, because
I might add to that, Doug. I will think we're at a very interesting time, and one thing that I think we all acknowledge ourselves, but we have to remember when we go about our day jobs, it isn't convincing someone to do anything. People are anxious. The changes we've lived through for 3 years and all the things that have happened to all of us.
right.
When you're living in a community like ours where there's a lot of action and there's lots of things going on, and then you plunk down something like Intel that brings even more change or signals that there's even more change, it's appropriate for us not to try to convince anybody, but to sit down and listen and acknowledge that in this community, this is what they care about. And this is the history of this community, whether it's a township or a city or one of our counties. And if I look across the 11 counties we represent, 24 cities that are partners,
Right.
and they all have a little bit different take on things. You and I have talked about it being more like a quilt. And this is a patchwork that makes an unbelievable blanket at the end of the day, but there's lots of patches and it's all a little bit different. The more we do that and break that down and talk about the how to do it, how do we equip partners with tools to do it? How do you change zoning? How do we finance things? And how do we address it from homelessness all the way through to suburban subdivisions to address the crisis, because we kind of have a gap on every level. And then how are we going to move people in between these and deal with some of our transit issues? And there's just great housing partners, there's great transit partners and stuff like that. I will tell you, none of them will be successful by convincing anybody to do anything. It is truly about listening and partnering and acknowledging what the other partner needs out of this. And that's part of all these deals we just talked about. And it's going to be increasingly important as we go forward, because we're going to be more diverse geographically, racially, everything else. We're going to have to be even better listeners and better partners in both directions. And the table is set for that.
I would just add that, Kenny and the Columbus Partnership has already, and the One Columbus, and from back to Columbus 2020, has already kind of set the table in terms of developing relationships. So there's already building some trust, And I think it's also about setting a vision. And I'll tell you, it's also about really understanding the data. And I think when you bring people together around a table, and I look at this study when they showed aerial views of other cities, that the before and after, and again, back to being blindsided and seeing sprawl versus planned. I mean, when people start coming to the table, into the huddle, and start seeing what can happen to us versus a vision of what can this community be. And we've already established some relationships, and I've always trying to really understand, and that part of it is the listening and convening again and again and again about where are you coming from and how can we together as a community work. I do think that's what differentiates us, and hopefully we won't see that same aerial map in 5 years and in 10 years, because we have the benefit of watching others, but we also have the benefit of already creating some of our relationships and having this partnership together to say, here's the data, here's what we have in front of us, and we're competitive, and we do want, I think everyone can be winners, it's not winners, losers, but we as a community, we want to win. We want to be the first one to actually show that we can be planful. So I think that it's establishing trust is it's a very difficult task, and it takes a lot of time.
Right. I want to ask you, I think one of the better examples of public-private partnerships that we see are like when Nationwide Children's Hospital, the work that they've done on the south side, or around Parsons, Crane family, and the south side, and obviously Wineland Park before that, like for a place like Linden or Milo Grogan or the Hilltop, like what can the corporate community be doing, that would be somewhat analogous to those having that kind of a nearby champion? Anybody?
Start.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start.
We'll all jump in.
I'll start by saying that, first of all, we haven't always gotten it right. We've certainly had our stumbles, and we've certainly had our failures in Central Ohio. And so I think it's learning from them is the first sort of key component to our own growth. I like that you brought up what the Crane family has done on the south side, because I think what happens when you have a corporate entity, corporate citizen, that can take the lead in sort of anchoring down on an issue or in an area, it allows for spurts of growth to happen in other places. The collaborative efforts find the project in many ways. And it's one of those things where, from a government standpoint, we rush to put resources onto the table where there are a corporate citizenry that's taken place, because they can do a lot of things that we just can't do. They can move a lot faster than we can move. They can address issues. They can zero in on real granular parts of their challenges in a community better than we can often. And so a lot of times it's really just kind of knowing your role and then finding a way to be partnered with that. And believe me, I got many calls from Ms. Crane over here saying that we've got a problem with this, is how we want to solve it. And I need the county or the city or the state to be right here. And she never came to the table and said, I need you to solve it all or provide all the its resources. It's been, here's what I need from you.
Right.
And here's the minimum. And here's what we'd like to have, and then here's where you can really go to achieve it. And we find a place, and generally speaking, like I said, but we've not won at everything we've done. I mean, I can point out 10 examples where we can get better. We can learn from our mistakes and our challenges. And I think the difference is there is a culture that I would say encourages that kind of collaboration.
Right.
I think, it was exactly what Kevin, our Commissioner, was talking about.
Your Honor is fine.
But, it's about finding the quarterback or finding the champion. And I have to give credit to Mayor Coleman, who actually was the real champion of the South Side and identified a significant challenge. And then he's smart enough to look around the table and said he can't get some things done. Right. And so we looked for a group of families or nonprofit leaders or faith-based leaders who has passion around it for some reason. And he happened to found us, and then we were able to really gather the community around. because it's not about one family or one mayor or one entity, but it is really about how can we convene and bring the right folks together around it, and our nonprofit partners are really the ones that sealed the deal. But I mean, it's back to that collaborative effort, finding the quarterback. I love the huddle. It's just, but reaching out, and the city, and this is a great example down at Reeb. I hadn't dealt with a city. We hadn't dealt with a city a lot, but I always thought of the city as bureaucracy. And I will tell you, every time we sat at the table, which was every week, the answer was yes. How do we do it? Every single week. And so that's the spirit that's like, how can we not get this accomplished when you have people around the table and someone, focus on the long term, not just, I'll be here for the next year, turning the page to something else, but you've got champions or a quarterback that are really in for the long term sustainability.
If I could just add one thing, because I do want to point out, again, we're not up here saying that Central High is the utopia of all places, because you think about how Central High was founded on the west banks of the Scioto and began to grow in a western direction, then in an eastern direction. And so as a result, through the course of time, there have been communities that historically have been neglected for whatever time that was happening, it existed then, whether it was the beginnings of Columbus or whatever. And so when Mayor Coleman and Tanny Crane worked together to zero in on some of the challenges of the South Side, the criticism that we have of ourselves is that it took us so long to figure that out and to really dig in on those problems. So we've got our challenges, and I think of the highway system that separated communities and tore through historical communities that had a lot of rich history and changed the face of what we know to be those neighborhoods today. King Lincoln and so many others. We didn't always get it right. And so now we are working hard as we go into the next generation, the next phase of what Central Ohio is going to be, to do better than we did last time at recognizing where the greatest needs are in our community and really investing in that in a way that is more hopeful for the future.
Can I just give a plug? Before coming here tonight, I was over at the Columbus State Community College at Mitchell Hall. YWCA is sponsoring an amazing kind of project. And I will not get this right, but it's like Undesigning the Red Line. And it's an exhibit that talks exactly what the commissioner is talking about. And it's about through educating. It was eye-opening to so many of us. And recognizing the problem, how it came about, and then once we become educated, what can we do to move forward? But it's a tremendous exhibit. It's going to be traveling to the Columbus Library. I'm not on the YWCA board, but it is a really awesome exhibit.
Yeah, but so that is that next step then. So we identify the problem, we educate people. Then who is going to step up and be that champion? Did you want to say something on this, Kenny? We've cut you off three or four times.
Well, I'm up here with two Columbus natives. Like these, they both grew up here, and I'll just give a little perspective is that it is different. I've been in communities where not only was it harder to form the partnerships, it was closed doors, and if the mayor liked it, then the business community wasn't for it. I mean, I've lived in those communities, and I would rather try something and get it wrong than be in communities who can't get together and try things together. And we're gonna make mistakes in this generation as well. 50 years from now, they'll say, well, I'm not sure why they developed it this way or that way. Right. Hopefully they can see that we had every great intention. I think when we do look back over the history of the country and also in Columbus, there's times when what's upsetting is the times when you can tell that there wasn't good intention. And that's where some of the real problems come from, and probably the worst, most lingering problems come from. You make development mistakes, things don't work out sometimes. We built 2 arenas. There's all kinds of examples that maybe we could have done differently. I suspect that'll continue to happen. But if we do it with intention, we do it with equity, and we do it together, I suspect we're going to get a lot farther than our partners and competitors around the country.
Yeah, Commissioner, you mentioned the Rise Together plan. So if we are going to be a more equitable community, if we are going to redress what redlining did to these communities, it was a very detailed plan. There were a lot of opportunities for private corporations, for the business community to get involved. How is that turning out?
Yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress. You know, you can't undo literally hundreds of years overnight. And so the key is that we've got the right leaders at the table helping us to think through just what that looks like, what it means, and what it costs us from an investment standpoint. You know, when I think about the banking institution we talked about earlier, at the heart of that is to provide lending opportunities to more African American families, more minority families. You know, and when you think about the history of slavery in this country and where we stand today, you know, we've had a lot of progress as a country. I don't think anyone could argue that. But the data point that I think reads the loudest today is the fact that the average white family in America has a median home asset value of about $170,000. The average black family has a median asset value of about $70,000. And so that difference is so significant because home ownership is wealth. Yeah. Home ownership is the ability to send your kid to college and change a generational wealth issue. It's an opportunity to start a business. It's an opportunity to invest in different things into your community. And so digging in on those things and really drilling down on where the challenges exist. One way is the Rise Together focus, where the county is focusing on poverty and racism and everything. The other is in the private sector, where we're building a banking institution that serves needs. And the other is, you know, where entities like the Crane, or folks like the Crane family, are helping to build an entire institution on the South Side, and that does everything from workforce development to other nonprofit or social service resources for those families. I mean,
the Cranes support everything, though. I mean, you know. You know, in this case, I mean, you're trying to get more, you know, more investors involved, more people involved, get more, not the usual suspects, you know, to take on an issue like redeveloping King Lincoln, you know, a neighborhood that you know, has historically been disinvested. So, like, you know, is that pitch landing? Like, is the education piece you're finding an audience for that?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I have to be honest with you. I was born and raised here. And as they say, you know, this isn't your father's Columbus. I mean, you know, when I was raised in Columbus, I mean, this was a very different city. Even in my high school days. I mean, I know you're thinking I'm really young. It wasn't too long ago. but it was actually a long time ago. And this is a very different Central Ohio. And I'm very hopeful that the Central Ohio that we all see 30 years from now is a very different Central Ohio. And I think that's the context of all of this growth. I mean, there's nowhere you can go in Central Ohio and you don't see an Orange Barrel or a Crane in the sky. Not one place, not one place. And I mean, that speaks to our opportunity to get it right, to improve on what, you know, our ancestors, you know, started here in Central Ohio one way or another, or those who have come and joined us since.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'll say that I think we are trying to get it right, and I keep going back to data. I know that as Columbus 2020, Kenny, you know, led the charge here. You know, we had 3 significant areas we wanted to impact. I don't remember all of them, but, you know, per capita income, number of jobs, and blah, blah, blah. And we did it. But it was, I mean, instead of taking 10 years, it took like 7 years. And it was an incredible effort and just really took Columbus to the next level. And it was, but one thing, you know, we did realize, and Columbus was not alone in this, but as we looked at some data from Brookings Institute, and we looked at prosperity, we looked at inclusion, specifically even geographic inclusion, we were at the bottom of the list. And it was eye-opening to us that we were just doing an incredible job of bringing new companies into the region, bringing new jobs, and raising incomes that all boats were not rising. But we were willing to look at the data and say, we can do better. And I think as we're moving forward, we're so focused on that area. So, and so prosperity is not just a word, that's a popular word these days, but what's behind it, and how do we reduce that racial equity gap? How do we create wealth? How do we create talent? How do we develop talent more equitably? How do we create quality jobs? All of us looking inward at our own organizations of how we recruit, how we hire, and attract talent, and then really change the face of this community. So I think there's heavy lifting going on, and I think that there's a real recognition that we're, again, using the data, opening our eyes, understanding the issue, and then moving forward to attack it. But we got to use metrics. I mean, we talk about bold goals. What do we as a community want to do? I mean, how are we going to really make a difference?
Sure. It is CMC's tradition to take audience questions, and we are doing this even though it's an evening forum. Is that the mic back there? Straight back here is the mic. So if you'd like to ask a question of our panel, go ahead and make your way back. Kenny, you have set bold goals for that, and are you resetting them now that Intel is here, and give yourself a little bit more of a challenge?
Yeah, I think when we got to the end of the decade, we said we wanted to be the most prosperous place in the country, and there's really three things behind that. There's absolutely still bold goals on growth. So without growth, you're really not going to have the revenue to do all the things we need to do. We got to have money that comes in the door. My banker tells me that all the time, and as commissioner, he reminds me of that as well. And that means we still have to have not only, we have to have good jobs being created, we have to have diverse industries, and we have to have wages moving in the right direction, which is tough to do to these days with inflation stuff we're just looking at. But we're creating great jobs in this community. That's number one. Number two is we hang our hat on being a great place, but we're affordable, right? It's one of our calling cards is you can come here, you can have a spectacular life and access to all of this and all that this region offers, and you can do it affordably. That starts with housing most of the time, as that's the biggest percentage of somebody's spend every month. And so solving the housing crisis has a lot of utility. One of those utilities is maintaining our value proposition.
Right.
Okay, so that's the second thing. And the third thing is economic mobility, right? And that means trying to close some gaps. And we're trying to close gaps in the inequities that exist in health, in geographic inequities we have across our region, and all kinds of different ways. But those three areas, and there's lots of metrics behind those. That's what prosperity means behind under the covers. And you'll hear us talking about that. I'm not sure I'll get a tattoo like I did on Columbus 2020 and those goals, Tanny, but Wait, you have a 2020 tattoo? We're on our way. No, I don't. You know I didn't do that. So again, growth, affordability, economic mobility, that's the pathway to becoming the most prosperous, or certainly more prosperous than those places we're competing with around the world, not even around the country.
Sure. Okay, you remember the rules. Make sure it's a question, no editorializing, and keep it brief. Go right ahead.
Good evening. My name is Brian Urbanski, and my wife and I have been affordable housing providers in Columbus for 20 years right now. Our company is Aubrey Homes, and I do appreciate the fact that you're addressing we have a housing crisis. I would add to that being on the front line of this housing crisis, the affordable housing community, particularly vulnerable populations, are the ones that are in greatest jeopardy right now. And this question is for Commissioner Boyce, or excuse me, for Your Honor Boyce.
Your Highness is fine.
Your Highness, I apologize. What is the plan for getting more resources to the folks, the vulnerable populations? In particular, we advocate for and we support justice involved. And many of my colleagues don't support them. And the resources are simply not there, at least right now. Even Impact and PRC and Compass are all struggling to get funds. And when our residents struggle, we struggle, and it becomes difficult for us to provide that essential housing to them. What is the game plan for the next 12 to 24 months to generate resources so some of our most vulnerable members of our communities don't face housing instability and homelessness?
Ed, that's a great question, and I know Jim Schimmer was here. Maybe he might have stepped out for our economic development director, but we're thinking that through. I mean, we let me talk a little bit about what we're doing with our Magnet Fund. We're really trying to help reduce some of the development costs so that we can spread affordable housing throughout Central Ohio and not just concentrate in Columbus. So that's one place to work directly with developers. But this Rise Together effort is really all about, is addressing those non-housing issues that support the sustainability and the stability of the family unit, making sure that there are resources that are beyond the housing. So clothing, employment, education, all of the things that provide a family with the ability to sustain a lifestyle. And we dedicated $3 million annually to what we refer to as an innovation center that will take ideas that you have and try to implement those, pilot them and implement them in Central Ohio to get at the issues you're talking about. And we've got a 10-year commitment, so I think $30 million worth of investment in just finding innovative ways to use our dollars, use our funds to really get at some of those issues that you're saying. And I know Tanny is actually on the board of our thinking and working group for the Rise Together Innovation Center that we're developing. And so we've got multiple efforts going on. We also dedicated a portion of the conveyance fee, when you sell a home and the transfer fee, a portion of that dedicated to affordable housing and really getting at the underlying issues that help sustain families. And so, look, in my opinion, there is no silver bullet. I was raised in an environment where I can tell you the definition of poverty. So there's no silver bullet. There's no one action item that we can take that changes the face. But I think we're on the right track in terms of really providing an opportunity for good ideas, big ideas that can be implemented now to move that needle and help those families.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Katie Chrysler, a Licking County resident, 1996 until I moved to Columbus after college in 2003. I do work for Deloitte. My question is, as a family of oldest of 4 girls, 4 sisters, my 3 of my sisters live in Licking County. What is the partnership doing to build that trust with not just Licking County, but other counties around the area, like Tanny talked about, that is so important?
Great question. I've been here 12 years. What was Columbus 2020 and now One Columbus. Started with 8 counties. Licking County was one of those. Now it's 11 counties. Partners like Morpsey and us sort of live and breathe those communities across those 11 counties. I don't really see, you got to close your ears, Commissioner, but I don't really see those county lines or those city boundaries. I see a market, right? And for over a dozen years now, there's been dozens of projects we've worked on with Licking County, as an example. And if you go out there, we've built so many relationships with the business community, with the development community. I don't think anybody could have planned for Intel. I mean, I've done this 28 years. It's by far the largest project, and not just here in our region or in Ohio. It's the largest project that's not an oil and gas project in the country. And so nobody could have planned for that. But on a normal basis, our team is actually there, probably a couple times a day. I see Mayor Spalding here in New Albany. Mayor Hall in Newark is great. They're great partners of ours. Our team is in Marion County every day. They're in Madison County every day, Marysville, Delaware, Pickaway County. And over time, we've worked with businesses, helping them to expand in all those areas, and we've helped those communities plan, and we've built great relationships. Is it perfect? No, because leaders are constantly changing, business needs are constantly changing, and the real kicker is the opportunities keep getting larger, and the problems keep matching that, right? So the infrastructure needs and stuff like that. To the last gentleman's question, it occurred to me, on any problem we have both urgent needs and long-term needs that we actually have to work in parallel. It's not acceptable for anybody that has an urgent need that we are not addressing that and trying to fix and put at least a Band-Aid on something and build a bridge from here to there. But most of our problems are going to take long-term commitment, 10 years, 20 years, to say we're going to actually invest, we're going to do the right things, we're going to take a long-term approach to relationships. That's kind of what I was getting at before when I was talking about listening and not coming in with a prescription. Licking County is a very different county than Franklin County. And Delaware County is a very different county than that. And their leaders are different. I appreciate that. I also recognize that across the board, people want to have a great community. They want to send their kids to great schools. They want to have safe places. They want the ability to have a good job and to move themselves forward. And that's universal. And that common area is where we start every conversation, and we've gotten an awful long ways that way. And so I think the prospects for this region are really where the magic is going to be for the next 10 or 20 years.
Was there anything you wanted to cover tonight that we didn't, that you were expecting to cover tonight that I didn't hit?
No, I hate when people say no and then they answer that. So I just did that. I'm sorry. We talked about that we don't always get it right, and I don't want you to sit here and think that we are not linked to some of the challenges that we have to face. I can assure you these are things that, from Mayor Ginther to all the mayors in Central Ohio and the county commissioners all throughout the region and the corporate leaders, I can assure you that we're all thinking about, and I hear it every day, whether it's I'm dealing with bank issues, whether I'm dealing with the county, or even other items. I hear it every day. And it's not just the African-American folks who are asking about diversity anymore. Now, everyone's asking about, when Kenny and I first talked about Intel and the success we're going to have there, before I could even bring it up, Kenny was bringing up the plan for inclusion and diversity, and that's the growth space. That's where we really made our mark as Central Ohio. So while we don't get it always right, I think our trajectory is positive at the very least.
Okay. Tanny?
Yeah, for one little annotation, as you were talking about the South Side and Crane, really, Jim Grody and the Grody family and my partner in crime, Jane Abel. If I'm not going to say that, she was true champion. So I really wanted to state that they were actually who Mayor Coleman first called was Jim Grody, because that family grew up on the South End, as they call it. If you're from the South End, I can call it the South Side. So I wanted to add that They were the true champions. And then, I guess to add on to Commissioner in terms of not getting it right, I think I've been passionate about education for over 30 years, and it's still a significant struggle. So, I'm very passionate about early education, and it's terribly disappointing to think that after all these years that so many of us have focused on it, that we still have less than 40% of our kids ready for kindergarten. And that's a direct corollary to third grade reading and success. And then unconscionable, our black children, 27% of them are ready for kindergarten. So, and I feel, we've been unable to change that trajectory. So there are tough areas that we still need to huddle about. And I'm always optimistic and so excited about the future of where we're going, but we have to look in the mirror and address these significant issues.
And not for nothing, there is the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research at Ohio State. So yes,
They're working.
You're working on it.
I just want to thank Jane for her work.
Well, Your Highness, Tanny, thank you very much.
King is fine.
King.
King of Central Ohio.
I've been watching too much.
Please welcome back
I
Kelly
might want to
Atkins.
cut that off. So, might want to. But I mean, if you are all like I am, like I've said many times about CMC that it is like a rah-rah Columbus place a lot of the time, and it's kind of made me the biggest fan of Columbus. But when you hear leaders like this, and when they're sharing their vulnerability and authenticity in a way that it's like, I want to be in the huddle with them. Don't you want to be in the huddle with them? Like, this is a pretty awesome display right here. So I'm just so grateful for that. Thank you for that. As we close, I'm going to ask you to help me thank everybody once again. So here we go. Our sponsors, we have the American Dairy Association Mideast and Deloitte. Our live streaming partners, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch. And of course, our speakers, Kenny McDonald, Kevin Boyce, Tanny Crane, and our host, Doug Buchanan. And let's give them a big round of applause first. And of course, we also cannot end without thanking you for coming tonight. So thank you for making our annual meeting a success. And please enjoy the rest of the celebration, as the bar is going to be open for almost another hour. Enjoy. Yeah.